The Zalthari Council's chamber was silent, save for the soft hum of ancient technology embedded in its obsidian walls. The room, shaped like a vast ellipse, had no windows, only screens projecting endless data streams, their blue glow casting an eerie light on the figures seated at the long, curved table. At the head of the table stood the Grand Elder, his long silver robe brushing the floor as he paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Around him the council members observed in tense silence. Their faces, usually composed and unreadable, were now etched with something akin to dread. The archive warned us. The Grand Elder's voice broke the silence, a tremor of worry in his tone. The planet is waking. One of the younger council members, a technician named Harold, shifted nervously. His fingers hovered over the interface in front of him, hesitating before he pressed a button. The holographic display before them flickered to life, revealing a tiny human ship descending onto the surface of the dead planet. It was a momentary flicker, nothing more than a speck in the vastness of space, but it was enough to send a shiver through the council. They've ignored the warnings, Harold said, his voice barely a whisper. How could they be so reckless? The Grand Elder's eyes narrowed. They are not like us, Harold. Their instincts are driven by something primitive. They do not understand what they are doing. Another council member, Zather, leaned forward, her thin fingers steepled together in front of her. They do not understand because they are desperate. We must not underestimate them. Her words were sharp, each syllable filled with the weight of ancient wisdom. But this is not a mistake we can undo. Harold swallowed hard. It's too late, isn't it? They've already activated the site. There was a brief pause, the room thick with tension. Outside the council chamber, far above the planet, a small human ship, its sleek, metallic surface glinting under the dim light of distant stars, hovered just above the ground of the long-forgotten world. The captain of the ship, Commander Alan Grayson, watched through the reinforced viewport as the landscape below grew larger with each passing second. The ground was cracked, dry, lifeless, but something within the ruins, something ancient, stirred to life. Grayson's fingers brushed against the edge of the control panel, his heart beating faster. "We've arrived," he muttered, as if to convince himself more than anyone else. "Captain," the voice of Dr. Emily Carrington, the lead scientist, cut through his reverie. "We need to be careful. The data we've gathered suggests that the planet is not just a dead world. It's a prison, a containment." Grayson didn't answer immediately. He studied the horizon, where the dust of ages swirled, but he knew what needed to be done. Humanity had no choice but to push forward. The mission was bigger than any one person's hesitation, bigger than any warning. They needed this. The galaxy was dying, and Earth's future depended on the knowledge hidden on this planet. The ancient race that had once inhabited it had left something behind, something that could turn the tide for Earth's survival. If they could unlock its secrets, they might stand a chance. "We do this now, Dr. Carrington," Grayson said firmly, his gaze locking onto the desolate landscape below. "We don't turn back, not now." "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady, but Grayson could hear the unease beneath her calm words. He didn't need to be a scientist to understand what was at stake. The dead planet wasn't simply a place of history. It was a time bomb, and humanity had just flipped the switch. On the Zalthari homeworld, the tension was palpable. The images of the human ship were magnified 1,000 times, displayed across the vast council chamber. The Zalthari council members sat rigid, their eyes darting from one another, unsure of what to do. A few exchanged murmurs, but no one spoke aloud. The Grand Elder spoke again, his voice hoarse. "The planet was sealed away for a reason. We must prepare for the worst." Zathor's eyes glinted in the dim light. "What are they waking? And why now?" Her question was one that had plagued the Zalthari for centuries. The dead planet was a mystery even to their people, and the archives' records were unclear. Some said it had once been the home of a powerful civilization. Others whispered of a weapon too dangerous to be wielded by any being, alien or otherwise. "I've told you before, the Grand Elder said, his voice laced with frustration. The archive was clear. Never wake the dead planet. But they are doing it anyway. Harold quickly tapped at his console, his fingers flying across the interface. The breach is complete. They've activated the main structure. The energy readings are off the scale. It's as if the planet itself is coming alive. A cold chill swept through the chamber. The Grand Elder clenched his fists, his knuckles white against the smooth surface of the table. Then it begins. Back on the human ship, Grayson felt the tremors beneath his feet as the ground cracked open. The ship's systems alerted him to an increase in seismic activity, but it was too late to pull back now. The ship's landing gear hit the ground with a resounding thud. As the crew disembarked, the air around them felt dense, suffocating, as if the very atmosphere was rejecting their presence. "Get your gear on," Grayson ordered, his voice steady, though the unease gnawed at him. The team gathered around him, their faces grim. They had known the risks, but standing on the surface of a dead world, feeling the weight of history pressing down on them, was something else entirely. Carrington, adjusting her helmet, approached Grayson. "Captain, we're about to see what's buried here. Are you prepared for what we might find?" Grayson looked at her, his expression unreadable. "We don't have a choice, Emily. Let's make sure this was worth it." As the team moved forward, the silence of the planet surrounded them, pressing down on them like a heavy shroud. They had entered something ancient, something that had been waiting, and they had no idea what it would do when it finally awoke. Above them, the stars seemed to flicker, as though the galaxy itself was holding its breath. The moment they crossed the threshold of the ruins, everything changed. The ground beneath the ship trembled as it touched down, sending a low vibration through the entire vessel. Commander Alan Grayson could feel it in his bones. His grip tightened on the control panel, his mind racing despite the cool exterior he tried to maintain. The planet had been dormant for centuries, millennia even, but something had stirred it awake. And now, humanity stood on the precipice of either salvation or destruction. The planet's surface was a dull brown, cracked and lifeless. Long shadows stretched across the barren landscape, the sun's light barely making it through the thick clouds overhead. There was no wind, no sign of life. It was a graveyard, a place forgotten by time. The ruins that lay scattered across the surface were once the home of a powerful civilization, a race long extinct, their legacy buried deep within the layers of dust and stone. Now, humanity had dared to disturb it. Grayson took a deep breath, steadying himself. "All hands, prepare to disembark," he ordered. The crew of the ship, clad in their reinforced exosuits, moved with purpose. They were well trained, ready for whatever lay ahead. But Grayson could feel the undercurrent of doubt running through the team. They had all read the reports, the warnings. The dead planet had a dark reputation. Yet here they were, stepping into the unknown. Dr. Emily Carrington, the mission's lead scientist, was the first to approach the airlock, her face a mask of concentration. She didn't look back at Grayson, but he could feel the weight of her thoughts pressing on him. He had known her for years, and in that time, he had never seen her this uneasy. "Captain," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the ship's comms. "The readings are off the charts, something's not right." Grayson nodded grimly. He knew the dangers, had known them from the start, but there was no turning back now. "Let's move out," he said, his voice firm. The airlock hissed open, and the first wave of humanity's explorers stepped onto the surface of the ancient planet. Their boots crunched on the ground, the sound eerily amplified in the stillness. The air was dry, the atmosphere thin but breathable. Carrington scanned the area with her equipment, her eyes flicking between the data streams on her helmet's visor and the ruins in the distance. "We need to get to the central structure," Carrington said, pointing toward a towering, jagged edifice in the distance. It loomed like a dark sentinel, its surface smooth yet etched with strange symbols that none of them could decipher. The planet's ancient inhabitants had left behind their marks, but they had not left any records. All they had were fragments, rumors, and warnings passed down through the ages. Grayson nodded, signaling the team to follow. The journey was silent, save for the faint hum of their exosuits and the occasional crunch of their boots against the dry earth. Every step felt heavy, as though the planet itself was pressing down on them, urging them to turn back. But they didn't. They couldn't. The information they hoped to uncover here could change everything for humanity. Earth was dying. Resources were dwindling. They needed this. As they approached the ruins, the air grew colder. Grayson couldn't tell if it was the atmosphere of the planet or something else. Something deeper, more primal. He had heard the stories, the myths about the planet, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer weight of the place. They reached the entrance to the central structure, a massive, arching doorway cracked and weathered with time. The doorway itself seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible energy, as if it were waiting for them. Grayson's breath caught in his throat. There was something alive about this place, something ancient and powerful. Carrington stepped forward, her fingers brushing against the surface of the door. "This is it," she murmured. "This is what we've been searching for." Grayson looked at her, his mind still clouded with the uncertainty of their actions. "We don't know what we're dealing with here," he said, his voice rough. "We need to be prepared for anything." Carrington didn't respond immediately. Instead, she pressed a button on her wrist console, activating the ship's AI system. "I'm opening the door," she said. The door groaned, its ancient mechanisms grinding as it slowly began to open. The sound echoed through the empty air, a harsh metallic screech that sent shivers down their spines. But none of them flinched. This was their mission. This was humanity's future. The doorway revealed a darkened passageway, its walls lined with strange markings and symbols that glowed faintly in the low light. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay, the weight of centuries pressing down on them. The team hesitated for a moment, their steps faltering, but Grayson's voice cut through the tension. "Move out," he said. "We're not here to hesitate." They entered the structure, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The walls seemed to close in on them, the markings along the surfaces shifting and changing as if alive. It was like walking through a living entity, one whose history had been long forgotten, whose secrets were buried beneath layers of time. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Grayson's chest felt tight, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He tried to shake off the feeling this was just a place, it couldn't hurt them. But his instincts, trained for years, told him otherwise. "Stay sharp," he muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the shadows. They reached the central chamber after what felt like an eternity. The room was vast, its ceiling disappearing into darkness. In the center of the room stood an enormous stone structure, its surface etched with more of the strange symbols. At its base, a deep black pit stretched downward, as though leading into the very core of the planet itself. Carrington stepped forward, her eyes wide with awe. "This is it," she said, her voice thick with disbelief. "This is what they left behind." Grayson's gut twisted. The air around them felt charged, as if the planet itself were aware of their presence. There was something in the pit, something waiting. Before anyone could speak, the ground trembled again. This time, it wasn't a slight tremor. It was more violent, a shaking that threw the crew members off balance. Grayson caught himself against a wall, his mind racing. "What the hell was that?" one of the soldiers asked, his voice rising in alarm. "I don't know," Grayson replied, his heart pounding in his chest. "But we need to get out of here. Now." But it was too late. The walls of the chamber shifted, the markings glowing brighter, and the ground beneath their feet split open. From the pit, a low hum began, vibrating through the structure and into their bones. It wasn't just a vibration. It was a sound, a frequency, that seemed to penetrate their very minds, as though something was calling to them. Carrington stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the pit. "This isn't just a power source," she said, her voice trembling. "This is something more, something alive, The hum grew louder, the air thick with energy. The walls of the chamber began to shift, the structure itself alive with movement. Grayson could feel it, a pressure in his chest, a weight bearing down on him. He turned to the team, his voice sharp. "Get back to the ship, now." But they couldn't move. The energy in the room had paralyzed them, their bodies frozen in place, unable to escape. And then from the pit, a voice echoed, a voice. Not a voice in the traditional sense, but a presence, something ancient and powerful, speaking in a language they could not understand. It was then that Grayson realized the truth. They had awakened something, and now they would have to face the consequences. The air in the chamber grew thick with a sense of impending doom. Grayson's heart pounded as the energy around them intensified, the walls of the ancient structure pulsing with a life of their own. He tried to move, tried to get the crew to act, but the force of the hum, of the presence rising from the pit, held them frozen in place. "Grayson!" Carrington's voice broke through the static of the moment, her face pale under the visor of her helmet. We've triggered something. This isn't just a power source, this is something alive. I can feel it." The tremor in her voice was unmistakable, and Grayson could see it in her eyes. This was no longer an expedition. This was survival. And they were no longer in control. The hum from the pit grew louder, vibrating through their bones. It was like the planet itself was resonating with their presence, shaking off the dust of centuries to awaken something far older, far more dangerous. Grayson's gaze shot to the pit at the center of the chamber. It seemed to draw him in, a vast abyss, its edges jagged and foreboding. From the depths something stirred, an ancient intelligence, an awareness that had been dormant for eons, waiting. Without warning, the ground beneath them shifted. The stone that had once been solid began to crack, the very foundation of the structure trembling as though the planet were groaning in pain. Grayson stumbled, his hands instinctively reaching for the walls to steady himself. But there was no holding back the oncoming force. The air seemed to crackle, and the space around them distorted as though reality itself was warping. "Get out, now!" Grayson barked, his voice strained with panic. His team hesitated for only a moment, but it was too long. As soon as the words left his mouth, the chamber split open, and the ground gave way beneath them. The very walls of the room seemed to buckle, and the ancient stone gave way to a darkness that seemed to reach up and pull them in. The world fell away in an instant. Grayson's body was weightless, his heart racing as he tumbled through the darkened void. Time seemed to stretch, the descent endless. He couldn't see anything except the blackness that swallowed him, the hum of the planet still echoing in his ears. He twisted mid-air, trying to focus, trying to stabilize himself, but there was no way to anticipate the chaos that had erupted. Everything around him was nothing but an overwhelming void. He hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the breath out of him. His exosuit absorbed most of the blow, but the force still sent a sharp pain through his ribs. Groaning, he pushed himself to his feet, blinking against the darkness that surrounded him. The air was thick and cold, oppressive. The sound of the hum was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. The others were scattered around him. Carrington lay on the ground nearby, her arm bent at an unnatural angle. The rest of the crew had managed to avoid serious injury, but they were dazed, disoriented, struggling to regain their bearings. "Is everyone all right?" Grayson's voice was rough, a cold sweat breaking out on his brow. His helmet's visor flickered, the light struggling to stay steady in the chaos. He scanned the area, searching for any sign of the source of the disturbance. Carrington groaned, slowly sitting up. "I think so, but where are we? What just happened?" Grayson took a step back, his eyes scanning the surroundings. They were no longer in the central chamber. The landscape around them had changed. The walls of the structure were gone, replaced by an endless expanse of jagged rock formations, the air now thick with an unnatural fog. The ground beneath them was slick, glistening as though it were covered in a thin layer of liquid. And above them, a strange red glow pulsed, casting an eerie light over the scene. We've fallen into something," Grayson muttered. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of realization. This is no longer part of the structure. We've descended into the planet itself. Carrington's eyes widened as she looked around, her breath catching in her throat. This isn't a ruin, this isn't a tomb. It's alive, it's breathing. Grayson's mind raced. The hum, the shifting walls, the distortion of reality. They had woken something more than just a dormant power source. They had awakened. A living planet, an ancient consciousness, one that had been slumbering for millennia. And now it was aware of their presence. The silence stretched on, thick and oppressive, the air hanging heavy with the unknown. Grayson could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of their situation. They had broken something far beyond their comprehension, and now they were trapped in the very heart of it. We need to find a way out, Grayson said, his voice steady, but the urgency was clear. Stay close, we move fast, we don't know what else this planet can do. The team nodded, their faces grim beneath their visors. The reality of their situation was sinking in, and there was no time to waste. Grayson gestured for the crew to follow him as he began to lead them through the strange, twisting landscape. Their movements were slow at first, cautious as they tried to make sense of the terrain around them. But the further they moved, the stranger the environment became. The rocks underfoot seemed to shift as if they were moving of their own accord, the ground itself pulsating with the same energy that had filled the chamber above. Grayson could feel it beneath his feet, a vibration that seemed to run through the very bones of the planet, syncing with the rhythm of his own pulse. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the air, a deep guttural sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was not a voice in the traditional sense, no words, no language, but a presence and intelligence that reached into his mind and took root there. You should not have come here, the voice whispered. A cold, empty sound that sent chills down Grayson's spine. You have disturbed what should not be disturbed. The crew froze, their heads snapping around as the voice echoed through their helmets. The words were not spoken, but they felt them, inside their minds, clawing at their thoughts, digging into their very consciousness. Grayson's heart raced and he turned to Carrington. Did you hear that? She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. It's in our heads. We need to move, Grayson said, his voice urgent. Now, get to the ship. We don't know what this planet is capable of. But as they turned to leave, the ground beneath them shifted again. This time it was violent, an earthquake of sorts, the very earth beneath them splitting open with a deafening crack. Grayson barely had time to react before the floor buckled, sending him stumbling forward. The pit that had opened before them was now widening, a gaping maw in the planet's surface, and from it, something began to emerge. It was massive, a shadow that seemed to swallow the light, its form shifting and twisting as it rose from the depths of the planet. Grayson's mind reeled as the creature, if it could even be called that, rose higher, its form expanding in every direction, pulsating with the same dark energy that had filled the chamber above. It was a being of pure energy, a manifestation of the planet's consciousness, and it was angry. Grayson's breath hitched as he realized the truth. This was no mere dormant power. This was the planet. And it had been waiting. The ground quaked, violently beneath them as the creature, an entity born from the heart of the planet, rose further into the air. It was not a being of flesh or bone, but something far older, far more terrifying. Its form was an ever-shifting mass of energy, dark tendrils swirling through the air like smoke, its presence a living nightmare. It moved without any clear structure, a vast, incomprehensible form that seemed to absorb everything around it, light, sound, and even their thoughts. Grayson's pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out everything else. The sheer magnitude of the entity's presence was overwhelming, a force that made the very air feel heavy, suffocating. It was as if the planet itself had come alive, reacting to their intrusion in the only way it knew how, with wrath. Move. Damn it! Grayson shouted, his voice hoarse with panic. He grabbed Carrington's arm, pulling her toward him as the ground beneath them cracked further. The rest of the crew scrambled to follow, but the shifting landscape was making every step more difficult. The very earth seemed to rise and fall like a living thing trying to swallow them whole. We need to get back to the ship. Grayson barked, his mind racing. They had no choice but to return to the only safety they knew, the ship. If they could make it back, they might stand a chance. But every step was met with resistance, the ground beneath them warping, folding, and reshaping in ways that defied all logic. The planet was alive, and it was angry. The entity, now fully visible, seemed to pulse with a dark energy, its form crackling with power. Its tendrils reached toward the crew, the air rippling as they passed through it. Grayson could feel his suit system straining, the pressure building against his chest. The creature was not just physical, it was mental, its presence suffocating. Crawling into their minds, it was aware of them, watching, waiting for them to make a move. "Captain." Carrington's voice was shaky, her eyes wide with fear as she glanced back toward the creature. "What is that thing? What's it doing to us?" Grayson's mind raced. There was no time for answers. All he knew was that they had awoken something far beyond their understanding, and now they were paying the price. He pulled her forward, ignoring the creeping feeling of dread that was washing over him. They had to reach the ship, that was the only hope they had. "Focus, Emily," Grayson snapped, his voice sharp. "We make it back to the ship, we fight. That's the only plan we have right now." The crew moved as fast as they could, their legs heavy as the earth beneath them seemed to push back, the land warping and shifting with every step. Grayson could feel the energy building around them, a constant pressure that seemed to come from all directions. He looked over his shoulder at the creature, still rising, still pulsing with that dark, unknown energy. It was like the very planet was a living organism, and they were nothing more than parasites, intruders in its world. Suddenly the ground cracked open in front of them, a massive chasm splitting the earth like a wound. Grayson leaped forward, barely catching himself as he landed on the other side, his heart racing in his chest. He glanced back at the crew, making sure they were all safe. Carrington was a few steps behind, her foot slipping as she nearly fell. Into the gap. "Emily!" Grayson shouted, reaching out to grab her arm. She looked at him, fear in her eyes, but she was too shaken to respond immediately. The ground beneath them was trembling again, and the creature's tendrils shot out, aiming to strike. With a desperate surge of strength, Grayson pulled Carrington toward him, both of them stumbling toward the other side. The rest of the crew followed quickly, their movements sluggish but driven by the urgency of their situation. As they reached the edge of the chasm, the earth shook again, and the dark entity loomed closer, tendrils crackling in the air like the fingers of some enormous unseen hand. "Get to the ship. Now!" Grayson yelled, his voice cracking with the strain. The crew didn't need another command. They ran, their feet pounding the earth as they sprinted toward the distant shape of their ship, the beacon of safety in the chaos. But even as they ran, Grayson could feel the planet's rage growing. The air was thick with energy, the ground beneath them shuddering with every step. It was as if the planet was doing everything in its power to stop them from leaving. The ship was close, but every second felt like an eternity. Grayson's thoughts flashed to Earth, to the people they had left behind, to the reason they had come to this forsaken place. Humanity was fighting for survival, and this planet, this dead world, had the key. But now, they had unleashed something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. "Captain," Carrington's voice was strained, filled with panic as she glanced behind them. "We're not going to make it." Grayson's heart skipped a beat as he turned to look at the rest of the crew. They were all running, but the creature was gaining on them, its tendrils slicing through the air like a whip. There was no time to think, no time to plan. There was only the fight for survival. "We will make it," Grayson growled, the words coming out as a promise, even though part of him doubted it. He pushed himself harder, feeling the adrenaline surge through him as the ship grew nearer, just a few hundred meters away. But the creature wasn't finished. It was relentless, its presence closing in, pressing down on them with an oppressive weight. Grayson could feel it in his chest, an unbearable pressure, as though the very atmosphere was closing in on him. The creature's tendrils struck the ground with a violent force, sending tremors through the earth, knocking the crew off balance. One of the soldiers, a young man named Riley, tripped, falling to the ground. "No!" Grayson shouted, turning. back just as the tendrils of the creature shot out, wrapping around Riley's legs. He screamed, his voice filled with terror as the creature pulled him toward it. "Riley," Carrington screamed, her voice cracking with fear. Grayson didn't hesitate. He turned back and sprinted toward Riley, reaching out to grab him. But it was too late. The creature's tendrils tightened around the soldier's body, lifting him off the ground. Grayson watched, helpless, as Riley's screams were swallowed by the darkness, his form disappearing into the creature's massive, shifting mass. There was no time to mourn, no time to process the loss. The planet was still alive, still attacking, and they had no choice but to keep moving. Grayson turned back toward the ship, his face hardening with resolve. "Move," he ordered, his voice filled with determination. "We're not leaving anyone behind." The crew surged forward, their feet pounding the earth as they reached the ship. Grayson could feel the pressure growing,